The heat from the Arizona sun lay heavy on Silver Creek, the air wavering above the scorched dirt road like smoke from an unseen fire. Agnes Hartwell stepped down from the stagecoach, her traveling dress already clinging to her skin despite the early hour. She had forgotten how fierce the desert could be, how it stripped away all pretense and left only truth beneath its relentless gaze. 12 years in Boston had softened her memories of this land, but not erased them. Never erased them. "Agnes, darling, do be careful." Richard Whitmore's voice cut through her reverie as he offered his hand. His palm was damp, unaccustomed to this climate, and his fine suit looked absurdly formal against the rough-hewn buildings of the frontier town. "This place is rather primitive." She allowed him to help her down, noting how his nose wrinkled at the smell of horse and dust and sun-baked earth. Richard had insisted on accompanying her from Boston, eager to assess whether Silver Creek was suitable for his future wife. The wedding was planned for autumn, a respectable ceremony that would unite two proper families and secure Agnes's position in polite society. It should have been everything she wanted. Richard was handsome in a refined way, educated, well-mannered. He represented safety, stability, a future without uncertainty. Her adoptive parents had been thrilled when he proposed. So why did her heart feel like a caged bird, beating frantically against invisible bars? "Miss Hartwell?" A weathered woman in a plain cotton dress approached, her face lined by wind and worry. "I'm Martha Dawson, head of the school board. We're so pleased you've accepted the teaching position." Agnes smiled, genuinely glad to focus on something purposeful. "I'm honored to be here, Mrs. Dawson. I've looked forward to returning to Arizona." Mrs. Dawson's eyes flickered with surprise. "Returning? You've been here before?" The question hung in the air, and Agnes felt Richard's hand tighten possessively on her elbow. She had told him only the barest details of her childhood, that she'd been orphaned young, raised in a church home, eventually adopted by a Boston family. She had never mentioned the Apache warrior who had saved her life. How could she explain something she barely understood herself? How could she put into words the memory that haunted her dreams? Strong arms lifting her from the desert floor, a voice speaking words of comfort in a language she couldn't comprehend, dark eyes that held more kindness than she'd ever known. "I was very young," Agnes said carefully. "I barely remember it." It was a lie. She remembered everything. "Mrs." Dawson led them through the town, pointing out the general store, the church, the small schoolhouse that would be Agnes's domain. Richard made disparaging comments about the crude buildings and rough inhabitants, but Agnes barely heard him. Her eyes were drawn to the mountains in the distance, purple and imposing against the endless blue sky. Somewhere out there, in those wild spaces, was the man who had given her life back to her. Did he ever think of her? Did he remember the frightened little girl he'd rescued? The thought was foolish, she told herself firmly. He had been a stranger performing an act of mercy. Nothing more. She had built him into something larger in her imagination, transformed a brief encounter into a fantasy that no real man could match. "Agnes, are you listening?" Richard's irritated tone snapped her back to the present. "I said we should inspect your lodgings before—" Good heavens, what is that? Agnes followed his gaze to the edge of town, where several Apache men stood near a trading post. They were speaking with the proprietor, their voices low and measured. Even from a distance they carried themselves with a dignity that put Richard's stiff posture to shame. Her heart began to pound without reason. "Local savages," Mrs. Dawson said with obvious discomfort. "They come to trade sometimes. We tolerate them because Mr. Henderson insists it's good for business, but decent folk keep their distance." "Savages?" Agnes's voice came out sharper than intended. "They're people, Mrs. Dawson. Human beings with their own culture and—" "Agnes!" Richard's scandalized whisper cut her off. "What are you thinking? These are the very people who terrorized settlers for decades. Your progressive Boston notions have no place here." But Agnes wasn't listening. One of the Apache men had turned, and even across the distance she felt the impact of his gaze like a physical blow. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with long black hair that fell past his shoulders. He wore a mixture of traditional and trade clothing, buckskin pants, a cotton shirt, a red cloth tied around his head, and he was staring directly at her. The world narrowed to that single point of connection. Everything else, Richard's voice, Mrs. Dawson's chatter, the bustle of the town, faded into meaningless noise. Agnes couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't look away. She knew him. Not from memory, exactly. The boy who had saved her had been young, barely more than a teenager. This man was fully grown, weathered by sun and hardship, his face marked by experiences she could only imagine. But his eyes, those dark, fathomless eyes, were the same. Time collapsed. 12 years vanished in an instant. She was 8 years old again, terrified and lost, and he was the only safe thing in a world that had turned to nightmare. He took a step toward her, and she saw recognition dawn in his face too. His expression shifted from casual interest to shock, to something that made her knees weak, a hunger so intense it should have frightened her. Instead, it answered something deep in her own soul. "Agnes, come along." Richard tugged at her arm, oblivious. "We don't associate with these people." She allowed herself to be pulled away, but she looked back over her shoulder. The Apache man stood motionless, watching her disappear into the crowd. Even from a distance, she could feel the weight of his gaze, the unfinished conversation stretching between them, like a rope drawn taut. That night, in the small room above the schoolhouse that would serve as her quarters, Agnes stood at the window and stared out at the stars. They were so much brighter here than in Boston, so close she felt she could reach up and gather them in her hands. Somewhere out there, under that same vast sky, he was thinking of her. She knew it with the same certainty that she knew her own name. "What am I doing?" she whispered to the darkness. "I'm engaged. I have a respectable life waiting for me. I should be happy." But happiness felt like a foreign concept, something she had read about in books but never truly experienced. Richard made her feel safe, valued, protected, but not alive. Not the way a single look from a stranger had made her feel this afternoon. No, not a stranger. Her savior. The man who had given her a second chance at life, and then vanished like smoke. Below her window, the town settled into sleep. But Agnes lay awake for hours, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and terror. She had come to Arizona to teach, to fulfill a duty, to prepare for a proper marriage. She had not come to fall in love. But standing in that dusty street, meeting those dark eyes, she had felt something shift inside her, a door opening that she had kept locked for 12 years. And now that it was open, she suspected no force on earth could close it again. 3 days passed before Agnes saw him again. 3 days of establishing her classroom, meeting her students, and enduring Richard's constant criticism of everything from the food to the accommodations to the uncouth locals. 3 days of going through the motions while her mind wandered to forbidden places. She was at the general store selecting supplies for the schoolhouse when the bell above the door chimed. The conversation in the store died instantly, replaced by a hostile silence that made her skin prickle. Agnes turned and saw him standing in the doorway, outlined by harsh sunlight. Up close, he was even more striking than she remembered. Not handsome in the conventional sense, but compelling in a way that made her forget how to breathe. His face was all strong lines and sharp angles, weathered by wind and sun. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, giving him a fierce appearance that should have frightened her. It didn't. Their eyes met, and Agnes felt that same electric connection she'd experienced 3 days ago. His expression remained carefully neutral, but she saw his hands tighten at his sides, saw the muscle jump in his jaw. "We don't serve your kind," the shopkeeper said coldly. "You know that." The Apache man didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge the insult. He simply continued to look at Agnes, and in his eyes she saw a question that made her heart race. "Do you remember?" "That's ridiculous," Agnes heard herself say, her voice cutting through the tension. "This is a public establishment. You'll serve him the same as anyone else." The shopkeeper's face reddened. "Miss Hartwell, with all due respect, you don't understand the situation here. These people are customers," Agnes interrupted firmly. "Unless you'd like me to write to the territorial governor about discriminatory practices. I'm quite certain he'd be interested to know that businesses in Silver Creek refuse service based on race." It was a bluff. She had no idea if the governor would care, but her tone was confident enough that the shopkeeper hesitated. The other customers muttered among themselves, clearly disapproving of her intervention. The Apache man's eyes widened slightly, surprise flickering across his features. Then, slowly, one corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Fine," the shopkeeper grumbled. Make it quick." The man moved to the counter with a grace that reminded Agnes of a mountain lion, all controlled power and predatory awareness. He placed several items on the counter: coffee, flour, tobacco. His hands were strong, scarred, capable. Agnes found herself moving closer without conscious thought, drawn by an invisible thread. She stopped beside him, close enough to smell the scent of leather and sage and something wild that made her head spin. "Thank you," he said quietly, his English accented but clear. "You did not have to speak for me." His voice resonated through her entire body. It was deeper than she remembered, rough around the edges, but carrying the same gentle tone he'd used when comforting a terrified child 12 years ago. It was the right thing to do, Agnes managed, though her voice came out breathless. "Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity." His dark eyes searched her face, and she saw recognition warring with disbelief. I know you." "Yes." The word was barely a whisper. "You saved my life, a long time ago." The shopkeeper was watching them with undisguised curiosity, and Agnes became aware that every person in the store had fallen silent, straining to hear their conversation. She didn't care. Nothing existed beyond this man and the way he was looking at her, as if she was something precious and impossible. "The child," he said slowly, wonder coloring his tone. "The little girl with golden hair and frightened eyes. You were lost. You found me." Agnes's eyes burned with unshed tears. "You carried me to safety. You saved me when you had no reason to trust a white child, when your people had every reason to hate mine." "I remember," he said softly. "I have never forgotten." The admission hung between them, heavy with meaning. Around them, the store patrons whispered scandalized comments, but neither Agnes nor the Apache man seemed to notice. They were caught in a moment outside of time, two souls recognizing each other across an impossible divide. "I'm Tsoe," he said. "My name is Tsoe." "Agnes," she smiled tremulously. "Agnes Hartwell. Agnes." He repeated her name like a prayer, and something in her chest cracked open. The child became a beautiful woman. Heat flooded her cheeks. And the young warrior became... She trailed off, unable to find adequate words. Became what? The man who had haunted her dreams for 12 years? The standard against which every other man had been measured and found wanting? "Miss Hartwell!" Richard's voice shattered the moment like glass breaking. He strode into the store, his face flushed with anger and exertion. "What in heaven's name are you doing? Mrs. Dawson told me you were seen conversing with..." He stopped abruptly, taking in the scene before him. His expression darkened. "Step away from that savage immediately." Agnes didn't move, couldn't move. "Richard, this is Tsoe. He saved my life when I was a child." "I don't care if he saved the entire territorial army," Richard snapped, grabbing her arm roughly. "You will not associate with these people. It's improper, it's dangerous, and it's..." "Remove your hand from her." Tsoe's voice was quiet, but it carried a weight of threat that made Richard stumble backward. "Now." Richard's face went pale, then red. "How dare you? I am her fiancé, and I'll thank you to..." "Your fiancé treats you roughly," Tsoe said, his eyes never leaving Agnes's face. "A woman should be cherished, not handled like property." The truth of his words struck Agnes like a blow. She had been so focused on Richard's respectability, his social standing, that she had overlooked his casual dismissal of her opinions, his need to control her every move. She had mistaken possession for affection. "This is outrageous," Richard sputtered. "Agnes, we are leaving, now." But Agnes found herself rooted to the spot, unable to look away from Tsoe's dark eyes. In them, she saw everything she had been missing: passion, respect, genuine connection. She saw the boy who had risked everything to save a stranger's child, and the man who had carried that memory for 12 years. She saw her destiny, terrifying and inevitable. "I need to go," she said finally, though every fiber of her being screamed in protest. "But thank you for then, and for now." Tsoe nodded slowly, understanding more than she had said aloud. "Perhaps we will meet again, Agnes." It wasn't a question. It was a promise. As Richard dragged her from the store, Agnes looked back one last time. Tsoe stood in the shaft of sunlight from the doorway, watching her with an intensity that made her soul ache. And in that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that her carefully planned life was about to come undone. because some forces were stronger than propriety, more powerful than social expectation, more enduring than fear. Some forces, like the bond between two souls who had found each other against all odds, could not be denied. The schoolhouse smelled of chalk dust and pine soap, familiar scents that usually brought Agnes comfort. But today, as she stood before her students, 12 children ranging from 6 to 14 years old, she couldn't focus on the arithmetic lesson she was supposed to be teaching. Her mind kept drifting to the encounter at the general store, to the way Tsoe had looked at her with recognition, and something deeper, something that made her heart race even in memory. "Miss Hartwell?" A small voice interrupted her thoughts. Little Emma Crawford, 7 years old with copper braids, was staring at her with concern. "Are you feeling poorly? You look flushed." Agnes forced a smile and turned back to the chalkboard. "I'm quite well, Emma, thank you. Now who can tell me what 7 times 8 equals?" The afternoon dragged on interminably. When she finally dismissed her students, Agnes sank into her chair and pressed her cool hands to her burning cheeks. What was wrong with her? She was a respectable woman, an educated teacher, engaged to be married to a proper gentleman. She had no business thinking about an Apache warrior she barely knew, no matter how powerfully he affected her. But that was the problem, wasn't it? She felt as if she did know him, as if that moment 12 years ago had forged a connection that transcended time and circumstance. When their eyes met, she had felt recognized in a way that went beyond mere physical appearance, as if he saw into her very soul and understood everything she had never been able to put into words. Richard certainly didn't understand her. He loved the idea of her, the accomplished teacher from a good family, the perfect ornament for his respectable life. But he had never asked about her dreams, her fears, the parts of herself she kept hidden from the world. He saw what he wanted to see and expected her to conform to his vision. A knock at the schoolhouse door made Agnes jump. She smoothed her skirt and called, "Come in." Mrs. Dawson entered, her expression troubled. "Miss Hartwell, might I have a word?" "Of course." Agnes gestured to a chair, but the older woman remained standing, her hands clasped tightly before her. "I feel it's my duty to address what happened at Henderson's store this morning." Mrs. Dawson's voice was strained. "Your interaction with that Apache man has caused quite a stir in town." Agnes felt her spine straighten defensively. "I simply ensured that a customer was treated fairly, Mrs. Dawson. Surely that's not controversial? In Boston, perhaps not, but here—" Mrs. Dawson sighed heavily. "Miss Hartwell, Agnes, you must understand the history of this territory. There have been conflicts, terrible violence on both sides. People here have lost loved ones, lost homes. The wounds are still fresh." "I understand that," Agnes said carefully. "But punishing every Apache person for the actions of some is neither just nor Christian. We cannot heal old wounds by inflicting new ones." Mrs. Dawson's expression softened slightly. "You have a good heart, my dear, but you also have a reputation to maintain. You're a teacher, a role model for the children, and you're engaged to a respectable man who clearly has concerns about your judgment." Anger flared in Agnes's chest. "My judgment? Because I treated another human being with basic courtesy? Because you allowed yourself to be drawn into an intimate conversation with an Apache man in full view of the entire town," Mrs. Dawson said bluntly. "People are talking, Agnes. They're questioning whether you're suitable to teach their children." The injustice of it struck Agnes like a physical blow. She had done nothing wrong, nothing shameful, yet she was being condemned for failing to embrace the prejudices of her community. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. These same people who claimed to follow Christian principles of love and forgiveness were demanding that she treat Tsoe as less than human. "What would you have me do?" Agnes asked quietly. "Keep your distance from the Apache people. Focus on your teaching and your upcoming marriage. In time, people will forget about this morning's incident." Mrs. Dawson's eyes were kind but firm. "I'm saying this as a friend, Agnes. This territory is not forgiving of those who step outside social bounds. For your own sake, please be more careful." After Mrs. Dawson left, Agnes sat in the empty schoolhouse and felt the walls closing in around her. All her life, she had tried to be what others wanted her to be: the grateful orphan, the dutiful daughter, the proper lady. She had buried her own desires so deep, she had almost forgotten they existed. But seeing Tsoe again had awakened something in her that refused to be silenced. For the first time in 12 years, She felt truly alive, every nerve ending aware, every emotion heightened, and the thought of suppressing that feeling, of returning to the numb safety of her previous existence, was unbearable. That evening, Agnes told Richard she needed to take a walk to clear her head. He disapproved. Proper young ladies didn't wander alone after dark, but she insisted, and eventually he retreated to his hotel with a disapproving frown. The moment she was free of his scrutiny, Agnes felt her lungs expand fully for the first time all day. The desert night was cool and clear, the sky scattered with more stars than seemed possible. She walked to the edge of town, where civilization gave way to wild country, and stood breathing in the scent of sage and creosote. "You should not be out here alone." Agnes spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Tsoe stood in the shadows of a cottonwood tree, so still she hadn't noticed him. In the moonlight, he looked otherworldly, like something from a dream. "How did you—" She trailed off, realizing the foolishness of the question. Of course he had moved silently through the desert. This was his land, had been long before white settlers arrived to claim it as their own. "I wanted to see you," he said simply, stepping into the moonlight. "I should not have come, but I could not stay away." Agnes's breath caught. The raw honesty in his voice stripped away all her defenses. "I'm glad you did." They stood facing each other, an arm's length apart, close enough that Agnes could see the rise and fall of his chest, could count the individual strands of his long hair, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body in the cool night air. "This morning at the store," Tsoe said slowly, "you defended me. Why?" "Because it was right." Agnes met his eyes. "And because I owed you. You saved my life once. The least I could do was ensure you were treated fairly. You owe me nothing." His voice was rough with emotion. "I did what any person should do when they find a child in need. But you—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "You have lived in my memory for 12 years. The little girl with golden hair and eyes like the sky. I wondered what became of you. If you survived, if you found happiness." "Did you?" Agnes whispered. "Find happiness?" Tsoe's expression turned sorrowful. "I found survival, purpose, but happiness." He shook his head. "That is a luxury the conquered do not often know." The pain in his voice cut through Agnes's heart. She found herself stepping closer without conscious thought, drawn by an overwhelming need to comfort him. "Tell me, please. I want to understand." For a long moment Tsoe said nothing. Then slowly he began to speak. "The day I found you, I was returning from a raid. Not for violence, for survival. My people were being pushed onto smaller and smaller lands, our food sources depleted. We took what we needed to survive, and the soldiers called us savages for it." His jaw tightened. "I was 18 years old, and already I had lost my father to a cavalry raid, my younger brother to disease brought by white settlers. My mother wept every night for her lost sons. When I heard your cries, my first thought was to ride past. You were the enemy's child. Why should I risk exposure to save you?" He looked at Agnes with raw honesty. "But then I saw your face. You were so small, so terrified. And I remembered my brother at that age, full of life and laughter before sickness took him. I thought, this child is not responsible for the sins of her people, any more than my brother was responsible for mine." Agnes felt tears streaming down her cheeks. "You risked everything for me. I carried you for miles, fearing every moment that soldiers would find us and shoot me on sight. You clung to me like you knew I was your only chance." Tsoe's voice softened. "I spoke to you in my language, told you that you would be safe, that I would not let harm come to you. You could not understand the words, but you stopped crying. You trusted me." "I still do," Agnes said without thinking. "I've never forgotten you. Never stopped thinking about that day, wondering who you were, if I would ever see you again." The air between them grew charged with electricity. Tsoe raised one hand slowly, giving her time to step away if she wished. When she didn't move, he touched her face with infinite gentleness, his calloused fingers tracing the line of her cheekbone. "The frightened child became a brave woman," he murmured. "A woman who stands up for strangers in a hostile town. A woman who walks alone under the stars without fear." "I should be afraid," Agnes whispered, though she felt no fear at all. "Everyone says I should stay away from you, that it's dangerous, improper. They are right to warn you." Tsoe's thumb brushed across her lower lip, sending shivers through her entire body. "Being near me will bring you trouble. Your fiancé already looks at me with murder in his eyes. The townspeople will shun you. You could lose everything. Then why are you here? Agnes's voice was barely audible. Because I am selfish. His eyes burned with intensity. Because 12 years ago, I held you in my arms and felt something shift in my soul. And today, when I saw you again, grown and beautiful and fierce, that feeling returned 1,000 times stronger. Because I know I should walk away, should let you have your safe, respectable life, but I cannot. Agnes's heart was pounding so hard, she thought it might burst from her chest. I don't want safe and respectable, I want— What do you want, Agnes? The way he said her name, like a caress, like a prayer, broke something inside her. All the walls she had carefully constructed, all the rules she had tried to follow, all the expectations she had struggled to meet, they crumbled to dust. You, she breathed. I want you. Tsoe's eyes widened, and for a moment he looked as stunned as she felt by her own boldness. Then his hand slid into her hair, and he pulled her close with a groan that sounded like surrender. Agnes, he whispered against her temple, we cannot. You are promised to another. This is impossible. I know. She wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face against his chest, feeling his heartbeat thundering beneath her ear. But I don't care. Tell me I'm not mad. Tell me you feel this too. This connection. This certainty that we were meant to find each other again. You are not mad. Tsoe's arms tightened around her. I feel it. From the moment I saw you in that town square, I have felt nothing else. It is like— He paused, searching for words. Like recognizing a part of myself I did not know was missing. They stood locked in that embrace for long minutes, neither willing to be the first to let go. Agnes had never felt so complete, so utterly at peace despite the chaos swirling around them. In Tsoe's arms, she was home in a way she had never been anywhere else. Finally, reluctantly, Tsoe eased her back enough to look into her eyes. What will you do? About your fiancé? The question hung heavy in the air. Agnes thought of Richard waiting for her in town, planning a future she no longer wanted. She thought of the scandal that would erupt if she broke their engagement. She thought of everything she would lose, her reputation, her position, possibly even her freedom, if Richard decided to make trouble. And she thought of living the rest of her life without ever feeling this way again. I don't know, she admitted, but I know I cannot marry him. Not now. Not after this. Tsoe cupped her face in both hands, his expression torn between joy and anguish. You would give up everything? For a man your people call savage? For a future filled with hardship and prejudice? I would give up anything, Agnes said fiercely, for the chance to be with the man who saved my life. The man who has lived in my heart for 12 years. The man who makes me feel alive for the first time in my entire life. Then you are braver than I thought. Tsoe leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away. And more foolish. Perhaps, Agnes whispered as his lips touched hers. The kiss was gentle at first, almost reverent, as if they were both afraid of breaking the fragile moment. But as Agnes's arms wound around his neck, and she pressed closer, the gentleness gave way to something more desperate, more consuming. This was 12 years of longing, of searching, of incomplete dreams, finally finding resolution. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Tsoe rested his forehead against hers. This will not be easy, Agnes. The path we choose will be difficult. I know, she smiled through her tears. But I would rather face hardship with you than comfort with anyone else. Then we will face it together. Tsoe's arms tightened around her one last time before he reluctantly stepped back. But you must be careful. Your fiancé is not a man who accepts loss easily. I see it in his eyes. He views you as a possession, not a partner. When you tell him the truth, he will not let you go peacefully. Agnes felt a chill run down her spine, but she lifted her chin defiantly. I'm not afraid of Richard. Then be afraid for my sake. Tsoe's expression was deadly serious. Because if he tries to hurt you, I will kill him. And then I will be hunted like an animal, and you will lose me forever. The raw honesty of his words, the violence he was capable of, the protection he offered so freely, should have frightened Agnes. Instead, she felt only gratitude that someone finally cared enough to defend her. No one will hurt me, she promised. And no one will take you from me. We'll find a way, Tsoe, together. He nodded slowly, though doubt shadowed his eyes. Go back to town before you're missed. But tomorrow night, meet me here again. There is something I want to show you." "I'll be here," Agnes promised. "I'll always be here." As she walked back toward town, her lips still tingling from his kiss and her heart soaring with dangerous hope, Agnes knew she had crossed a line from which there was no return. She had tasted freedom, felt passion, discovered what it meant to be truly seen and valued, and she would fight with everything in her to keep it. The morning brought harsh reality crashing back. Agnes woke to find Richard pounding on her door, his face red with fury, and what looked suspiciously like dried tears. "Where were you last night?" he demanded the moment she opened the door. "I went to check on you and you were gone." "Gone? For over 2 hours." Agnes wrapped her robe more tightly around herself, acutely aware that she wore only her nightgown beneath it. "I told you I was taking a walk. I needed time to think. For 2 hours. In the dark." Richard pushed past her into the small room, his movements agitated. "Do you have any idea how worried I was? How improper it was for you to wander around unsupervised? I'm a grown woman, Richard. I don't require supervision. You're my fiancé." He whirled to face her, and for the first time Agnes saw something ugly beneath his refined exterior. "You represent me, Agnes. Your behavior reflects on my reputation. And what I saw yesterday at that store, you speaking to that savage like he was your equal, defending him to the shopkeeper, it was humiliating." "Humiliating for you?" Agnes felt her own anger rising. "Or humiliating that I treated another person with basic human decency?" "They're not people like us." Richard's voice rose dangerously. "They're heathens, Agnes. Violent, primitive heathens, who murdered innocent settlers by the hundreds. How can you possibly defend them?" "I'm not defending violence," Agnes said carefully. "I'm defending one man who showed me kindness when he had no reason to. One man who saved my life at great risk to his own." Richard's eyes narrowed. "So it's true, the gossip I heard this morning, that you have some sort of history with that Apache, that he's the one who supposedly rescued you as a child." "It's not supposedly. He did rescue me. I would have died in the desert if not for Tsoe." "Tsoe?" Richard spat the name like a curse. "You know his name? How intimate? Tell me, Agnes, did you meet with him last night? Is that where you were during your walk?" Agnes's heart hammered, but she forced herself to meet Richard's gaze steadily. This was the moment, the choice she had to make. She could lie, could salvage her engagement and her reputation, could return to the safe path she had been following, but she would lose Tsoe. She would lose herself. "Yes," she said quietly. "I saw him last night. We talked." The slap came so fast she didn't have time to react. Pain exploded across her cheek, and she stumbled backward, her hand flying to her face in shock. Richard looked as stunned as she felt. His hand was still raised, trembling, his face white with horror at what he'd done. "Agnes, I didn't mean you made me—" "Get out!" Agnes's voice was deadly calm, though her entire body shook with rage and shock. "Get out now!" "Agnes, please, I lost my temper. But you have to understand, I understand perfectly." She straightened to her full height, ignoring the throbbing in her cheek. "I understand that you believe you own me, that my thoughts, my feelings, my very movements are subject to your approval, that you think you have the right to strike me when I displease you. It was one moment of weakness. It was the truth of who you are." Agnes moved to the door and held it open. "The engagement is over, Richard. I will not marry you. I will not spend my life walking on eggshells, afraid of your temper, pretending to be someone I'm not just to keep you happy." Richard's expression cycled through shock, hurt, and finally settled on cold fury. "You're throwing away our future for what? Some fantasy about a savage who will never be accepted by decent society? You'll be ruined, Agnes. No respectable man will have you. Then I'll live without a respectable man." Agnes lifted her chin. "I'd rather be alone than with someone who sees me as property." "You won't be alone, will you?" Richard's eyes glittered with malice. "You'll be with him, that Apache. Tell me, have you already let him touch you? Have you spread your legs for a—" "Enough!" The roar came from the doorway where Tsoe suddenly appeared, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. "Leave, now, before I forget that I do not kill unarmed men." Richard blanched, taking a step back, but his pride wouldn't let him retreat without a parting shot. "This isn't over. I'll see you both ruined for this. I'll tell everyone what you are. a whore who spreads her legs for savages. Tsoe moved with lightning speed, pinning Richard against the wall with one hand around his throat. "Say one more word," he growled, his voice deadly quiet, "and I will rip out your tongue and feed it to the coyotes. Agnes is a lady of courage and honor, worth 1,000 of you. Now get out of my sight before I lose control." He released Richard, who stumbled toward the door, gasping and rubbing his throat. At the threshold, Richard turned back, his expression twisted with hatred. "You'll regret this, both of you. I'll make sure of it." Then he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the stairs. In the sudden silence, Agnes became aware that she was trembling violently. Tsoe turned to her, his anger instantly transforming to concern. "Let me see." She allowed him to gently tilt her face, his fingers feather-light as they examined the red mark on her cheek. His jaw clenched, and she saw murder in his eyes. "He struck you," Tsoe said flatly. "I should have killed him." "No." Agnes caught his hand, pressing it against her uninjured cheek. "You did the right thing. Killing him would only give them an excuse to hunt you. We can't let him win that way. He hurt you." The anguish in Tsoe's voice made her heart ache. "I swore to myself that I would protect you, and I failed." "You didn't fail, you were here." Agnes managed a shaky smile. "How did you know to come?" "I was watching. I have been since dawn, worried about your safety." He looked almost embarrassed. "I know it is not appropriate, but I could not stay away knowing that man was nearby." Relief flooded through Agnes, followed by warmth. "I'm glad you were here. But Tsoe, he meant what he said. He'll try to ruin both of us. He has connections back east, influence. He could make life very difficult. Let him try." Tsoe's arms came around her, pulling her close. "I do not care what lies he spreads, or what threats he makes. Nothing will keep me from you." Agnes pressed her face against his chest, breathing in his scent, letting his strength steady her. "The town will turn against me now. Mrs. Dawson will likely dismiss me from my teaching position. People will talk. Then we will leave." Tsoe's decision was immediate. "I have family in the mountains, away from white settlements. We can go there, start fresh." "Leave?" Agnes pulled back to look at him. "But your home." "My home is wherever you are." He cupped her face gently, careful of her bruised cheek. "Agnes, I have lived 30 years without knowing real happiness. 12 years ago, I held a frightened child and felt my heart open in a way I did not understand. Yesterday I saw that child grown into a woman of courage and beauty, and I understood. You were always meant to be mine, and I was always meant to be yours. I will not let prejudice or fear or convention keep us apart." Tears streamed down Agnes's cheeks. "I love you," she whispered. "I don't know when it happened, maybe 12 years ago, maybe yesterday, maybe in every moment in between. But I love you, Tsoe, with everything I am, and I love you." He kissed her forehead, her temple, her lips with aching tenderness. "My Agnes, my brave, beautiful Agnes." A sharp knock at the door made them both freeze. Mrs. Dawson's voice called out, "Miss Hartwell, are you in there? I need to speak with you immediately." Agnes and Tsoe exchanged glances. "She'll have heard about the broken engagement," Agnes murmured. "Probably about your presence here this morning, too. News travels fast in a small town." "Do you want me to leave?" Tsoe asked. Agnes considered for a moment, then shook her head. "No, I'm done hiding, done pretending. If she's here to dismiss me, she should know exactly why I broke my engagement and why I don't regret it." She opened the door to find Mrs. Dawson looking distressed, her normally composed features tight with worry. Behind her stood several other townswomen, their expressions ranging from concern to outright hostility. "Miss Hartwell." Mrs. Dawson's eyes flickered to Tsoe, then back to Agnes. "Mr. Whitmore came to me this morning with some very disturbing accusations. He claims you've been carrying on an inappropriate relationship with him." She gestured at Tsoe without looking at him. "He showed me bruises on his neck and claimed he was attacked while trying to protect you from unwanted advances." Agnes felt fury surge through her. "That's a lie. Richard struck me when I told him our engagement was over. Tsoe intervened to prevent further violence." Mrs. Dawson's eyes widened as she took in the red mark on Agnes's cheek. For a moment, doubt flickered across her face. But then one of the other women spoke up. "She's lying to protect her Indian lover." Mrs. Peterson, the banker's wife, practically spat the words. "We all know what she is now. A woman of loose morals who prefers savages to decent Christian men. I suggest you watch your tongue, Tsoe said quietly, but with such menace that Mrs. Peterson stepped back. Agnes is worth more than all of you combined. She has shown more courage and compassion in one day than you have in your entire lives. How dare you speak to us? Another woman gasped. Someone fetch the sheriff. That won't be necessary. Sheriff Morrison pushed through the crowd, his weathered face weary. He looked at Agnes with something like pity. Miss Hartwell, I'm going to have to ask you to leave town, for your own safety as much as anything else. Feelings are running high, and I can't guarantee I'll be able to protect you from mob justice. Mob justice? Agnes stared at him in disbelief. For what crime? For ending an engagement with a man who struck me? For consorting with an Apache? The sheriff's tone was matter-of-fact. Right or wrong, that's how people see it. And Mr. Whitmore has filed a complaint claiming assault. He's demanding that your friend here be arrested. On what grounds? Tsoe's voice was ice. For defending a woman from violence? For being Apache in a town that doesn't want you here? The sheriff met Tsoe's eyes directly. I'm being straight with you because I respect that you saved Miss Hartwell as a child. But you need to leave, both of you, today, before this turns uglier than it already has. Agnes felt Tsoe's hand find hers, their fingers interlacing. She looked around at the gathered crowd, people she had hoped to serve, to teach, to help. Instead, they stared at her with judgment and disgust, as if she had committed some unforgivable sin. Only Mrs. Dawson's expression held any sympathy. I'm sorry, Agnes, she said quietly. I wish things could be different. You would have made an excellent teacher. I'm sorry too, Agnes replied. Sorry that this town chooses hatred over humanity. She turned to Tsoe, and in his eyes she saw strength and certainty that steadied her own resolve. Take me home, she said simply. Take me to your family. Tsoe's expression transformed with joy and relief. Are you certain? There is no going back from this choice. I've never been more certain of anything. Agnes squeezed his hand. The only thing I regret is not making it sooner. They packed Agnes's few belongings in tense silence while the crowd dispersed, muttering among themselves. The sheriff remained, ostensibly to keep the peace, but Agnes suspected he was simply ensuring they actually left. As they prepared to depart, a small figure darted through the crowd. Little Emma Crawford, her eyes red from crying. Miss Hartwell, don't go. You're the best teacher we ever had. Agnes knelt down, ignoring the disapproving gasps from the remaining townswomen. Emma, sweetheart, I have to go, but I want you to remember something. Always stand up for what's right even when everyone else says you're wrong, and never let anyone make you feel ashamed for showing kindness. Emma threw her arms around Agnes's neck. I'll remember, I promise. As Agnes stood, she caught Mrs. Dawson's eye one last time. The older woman's expression was troubled, and Agnes thought she saw regret there. Perhaps someday Silver Creek would change. Perhaps someday people like Mrs. Dawson would find the courage to challenge the prejudices that poisoned their community. But that day wasn't today, and Agnes was done waiting for the world to be ready for her love. Tsoe helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. As they rode out of town, Agnes didn't look back. She kept her eyes fixed on the mountains ahead, where a new life waited, uncertain, perhaps difficult, but real in a way her old existence had never been. No regrets? Tsoe murmured against her ear. Agnes leaned back into his warmth, feeling his heartbeat steady against her spine. Not a single one. They rode for hours through increasingly rugged terrain, leaving behind the scattered settlements of white civilization and entering land that seemed untouched by time. The desert gave way to rocky hills dotted with pine and juniper, the air growing cooler and sweeter as they climbed. Agnes had never seen landscape so beautiful or so unforgiving. Tsoe rode with confidence, guiding his horse along paths that were invisible to Agnes's untrained eyes. Occasionally he would point out landmarks, a distinctive rock formation, a hidden spring, an eagle's nest, sharing his knowledge of this land that was his home. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson, they crested a rise, and Agnes caught her breath. Below them, nestled in a valley protected by steep canyon walls, was a small Apache settlement. Perhaps 20 wickiups, traditional dwellings made of brush and hide, were scattered among cottonwood trees near a clear stream. Smoke rose from several cooking fires, and Agnes could hear children laughing, voices calling to one another in the Apache language. "Your family?" she asked. "What remains of them?" Tsoe's voice carried old grief. "Once, we numbered in the hundreds. Now—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. As they descended into the valley, people began to emerge from the wickiups, watching their approach with curiosity and wariness. Agnes saw women with infants on their hips, elders with weathered faces, young men who studied Tsoe and his passenger with interest. A woman of perhaps 50 years stepped forward as Tsoe dismounted. Her face was lined but beautiful, her dark eyes sharp and assessing. She spoke rapidly in Apache, her tone questioning, and Tsoe responded in the same language. Agnes caught one word that sounded like mother, and realized this must be Tsoe's mother, the woman who had wept for her lost sons, who had survived so much loss and hardship. The conversation continued for several minutes, with Tsoe's mother's expression shifting from surprise to disbelief to something that might have been understanding. Finally, she turned her attention to Agnes, studying her with an intensity that made Agnes want to fidget. But she held herself still, meeting the older woman's gaze with as much respect and courage as she could muster. Tsoe's mother spoke again, her words softer now. Tsoe helped Agnes dismount, then took her hand and led her forward. "Agnes, this is my mother, Desba. Mother, this is Agnes, the child I saved 12 years ago, now the woman I love." Desba's eyes widened, and she looked between them with dawning comprehension. She reached out slowly and touched Agnes's face, her fingers gentle on the fading bruise. She said something in Apache that sounded like a question. "She asks who hurt you," Tsoe translated, "and if that person still breathes." Agnes felt a rush of warmth toward this fierce woman. "My former fiancé struck me when I ended our engagement, but Tsoe stopped him. No one will hurt me again." Tsoe translated, and Desba nodded approvingly. She spoke again, longer this time, and Tsoe's expression softened. She says that any woman brave enough to choose love over safety, to choose her son over her own people's approval, is worthy of respect. She welcomes you to our family." Tears sprang to Agnes's eyes. "Tell her thank you. Tell her I know I have much to learn about your ways, but I'm willing to try. I want to be worthy of her son." Desba seemed to understand even before Tsoe translated. She pulled Agnes into an embrace that smelled of smoke and sage and something sweetly unfamiliar. When she released her, Desba was smiling, a beautiful smile that transformed her entire face. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and broken communication. Tsoe's extended family welcomed Agnes with varying degrees of enthusiasm, some openly friendly, others more cautious, all curious about this white woman who had appeared with their kinsman. An elderly man named Nantai, who Tsoe introduced as his uncle, spoke some English. Over a meal of roasted meat, corn, and a type of bread Agnes had never tasted before, Nantai explained the challenges facing their small community. "We live here in peace," he said, his voice gravelly with age. "We hunt, we plant small gardens, we trade with the few white men who will deal fairly with us, but it becomes harder each year. The soldiers push us to move to reservations, where we would be dependent on government rations that never come. Many of our young people have already gone, believing it is the only way to survive." "Why haven't you gone?" Agnes asked. Nantai's eyes flashed with pride. "Because this is our land. Our ancestors are buried here. Our stories are written in these mountains. To leave would be to abandon not just our home, but our very identity." Agnes understood that sentiment more deeply than he could know. Hadn't she just made a similar choice? To be true to herself, to claim her own identity regardless of the cost. As darkness fell, Tsoe led Agnes to a small wickiup set slightly apart from the others. "My home," he said simply. "It is not much. It's perfect." Agnes stepped inside and looked around the small space. A fire pit dominated the center, with sleeping furs arranged along one side. Woven baskets held supplies, and traditional weapons hung from the wooden frame. It was simple, utilitarian, and somehow felt more honest than any of the elaborately furnished rooms she had occupied in Boston. Tsoe built a fire, while Agnes arranged her few belongings. When he finished, he sat back and watched her with an expression that made her pulse quicken. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. "That I cannot believe you are here, that I keep expecting to wake and find this was a dream." He reached out and pulled her down beside him. "Agnes, are you certain this is what you want? Life here is hard. We have little comfort, little security. You are giving up so much." She silenced him with a kiss. "I'm giving up nothing that matters, and I'm gaining everything I've ever wanted." "What have you wanted?" His voice was rough with emotion. "You. This. A life that's real, not performed for others' approval." Agnes cupped his face in her hands. "I've spent my whole life trying to be what others expected. The grateful orphan, the dutiful daughter, the proper lady. I was so busy being what I should be that I forgot to discover who I actually am. But with you I can just be Agnes. Flawed, imperfect, but real." Tsoe pulled her fully into his arms, and they sat by the fire, holding each other as night deepened around them. Agnes felt peace settle over her, a deep, bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. "Tell me about the words," she said after a while. "The words you said when you rescued me. I never forgot them, but I never knew what they meant." Tsoe was quiet for a moment. "Don't be afraid, little one," he finally said. "You are safe now. I will not let the darkness take you." Fresh tears spilled down Agnes's cheeks. "I wasn't afraid. Not once I heard your voice. Somehow I knew you would keep me safe. And I will," Tsoe promised. "For the rest of my life I will keep you safe." They made love slowly that night, learning each other's bodies with reverence and wonder. There was no rush, no urgency, only the slow building of pleasure and connection, the joy of two souls finally finding their home in each other. Afterward, wrapped in Tsoe's arms beneath warm furs, Agnes watched firelight dance across the ceiling of the wickiup and felt more content than she had ever been in her life. "What happens now?" she asked drowsily. "Will Richard really try to cause trouble?" "Perhaps, but he has no power here." Tsoe pressed a kiss to her temple. "And even if he brings soldiers, we can disappear into the mountains. My people have been evading the cavalry for generations. We know every canyon, every hidden trail." Agnes snuggled closer, feeling his heart beating steadily beneath her ear. "I want to help. I can teach. Not just children, but adults too. Reading, writing, arithmetic. Knowledge is power, and your people deserve every advantage." Tsoe's arms tightened around her. "You would do that? Teach my people?" "They're my people now too," Agnes said simply. "And yes, I would love to teach them, if they'll have me." "They will have you." Tsoe's voice was thick with emotion. "You cannot know what this means, Agnes. Education has been denied to us, withheld as another form of control. For you to offer to share your knowledge freely, it is a gift beyond measure." They talked deep into the night, making plans for the future. Agnes would start teaching basic English and mathematics to anyone interested. Tsoe would help her learn Apache language and customs. Together, they would bridge the gap between their two worlds, creating something new and beautiful from the ruins of the old. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that was both foreign and deeply satisfying. Agnes woke each morning to the sound of the stream and the smell of pine smoke. She learned to grind corn, to identify edible plants, to tan hides. Her hands, once soft and useless, grew calloused and capable. Desbar took her under wing, teaching her with patience and occasional exasperated humor when Agnes made mistakes. The language barrier was frustrating at first, but Agnes learned quickly, motivated by necessity and genuine affection for Tsoe's mother. The women of the camp were initially wary, but Agnes's willingness to learn and her obvious love for Tsoe gradually won them over. When she successfully tanned her first hide, albeit imperfectly, the women celebrated with her as if she had accomplished something momentous. In the evenings, Agnes began her informal school. She started with just 3 students, 2 children and 1 curious elder. But within a week, a dozen people were gathering to learn. Tsoe acted as translator when needed, though Agnes made it a point to teach in simple English, knowing that language skills would be crucial for survival in an increasingly white-dominated world. She also learned from them. Nantai told stories of Apache history, of battles and heroes and tragedies. The women taught her traditional songs. The children showed her how to move silently through the forest, how to read animal tracks, how to find water in seemingly barren land. Agnes had never felt more alive. Every day brought new challenges, new discoveries, new reasons to be grateful for the choice she had made. But peace, as she was learning, was always temporary on the frontier. 3 weeks after their arrival, Tsoe returned from a hunting trip with news that made Agnes's blood run cold. Richard has returned. He came to Tucson with federal marshals and soldiers, telling them that you were kidnapped by a violent Apache warrior. They're searching for us. Agnes felt ice flood her veins. But that's absurd. I chose to come here. I wasn't kidnapped. Truth doesn't matter when prejudice is involved. Nantai's weathered face was grim. They will use this as an excuse to attack us, to drive us from our land. It's what they've always wanted. We should move deeper into the mountains, one of the younger men suggested. Disappear before they find us. No. Agnes stood, her mind racing. If we run, it confirms their story. We need to go to them. Let me speak to the authorities, tell them the truth. Agnes, no. Tsoe gripped her shoulders. You cannot trust them to listen, and I will not risk you falling back into Richard's hands. He can't force me to return with him. I'm a grown woman who made her own choice. Agnes met Tsoe's eyes steadily. I won't let Richard's lies destroy your home. Let me try to make this right. She has courage, nephew, Nantai said quietly. And perhaps she is right. If she willingly returns and testifies that she came here of her own free will, it removes their justification for violence. Tsoe looked tormented, torn between logic and fear. If they hurt you, they won't. Agnes took his face in her hands. I'll go to Tucson, speak to the marshals, and make the truth clear. You stay here with your family. If it goes wrong, if Richard somehow manages to manipulate the situation, then you run. Get everyone to safety. I'm coming with you. Tsoe's tone brooked no argument. I will not let you face them alone. They argued, but Agnes knew from Tsoe's expression that she wouldn't win this battle. Finally, she conceded. Fine, but you stay out of sight until I've had a chance to speak with the authorities. Agreed? Agreed. Tsoe pulled her into a fierce embrace. But if they try to harm you, I'm ending this conversation with bullets. They left at dawn, riding hard for Tucson. Agnes's mind churned with possibilities, trying to anticipate every argument Richard might have made, every lie he might have told. She had to be convincing, had to make the authorities understand that she was there by choice and that Tsoe was not the villain of this story. As they approached the town, Tsoe guided them to a ridge overlooking the main street. From their vantage point, they could see increased military presence, at least 24 soldiers, far more than the usual garrison. This is worse than I thought, Tsoe muttered. They're preparing for a campaign. Agnes felt dread settle in her stomach, but she forced herself to stay calm. I'll go down alone. You wait here and watch. If I don't return by sunset, If you don't return by sunset, I'm coming to get you. Tsoe kissed her hard, and heaven help anyone who stands in my way. Agnes made her way into town alone, her heart hammering. She went straight to the marshal's office, where she found Richard speaking with 2 stern-looking men in federal uniforms. Richard's face went white when he saw her. Agnes, thank heavens you're safe. I've been frantic with worry. Stop lying. Agnes's voice rang out clear and strong. I'm here to tell you, Marshal, that I was not kidnapped. I left Silver Creek voluntarily with Tsoe, an Apache man who saved my life as a child. I broke my engagement to Mr. Whitmore because he struck me in anger. Everything he's told you is a fabrication designed to justify violence against innocent people. The marshals exchanged glances. The older one, a grizzled man with steel-grey hair, studied Agnes with sharp eyes. Miss Hartwell, is it? Yes, sir. You're saying you went with this Apache willingly, that you're currently residing in his camp of your own free will. That's exactly what I'm saying. Agnes lifted her chin. I love him. I choose to be with him, and I will not allow Mr. Whitmore's wounded pride to result in violence against peaceful people. She's been brainwashed, Richard interjected desperately. Anyone can see she's not in her right mind. That savage has clearly... I suggest you stop speaking, Agnes said coldly, before I tell these gentlemen about the bruise you left on my face when I refused to obey you. Richard's face flushed red. You little... Mr. Whitmore, that's enough. The marshal's voice cut through the tension. Miss Hartwell, you seem quite clear-headed to me, but I need to ask, Are you aware that by consorting with Apache people, you're making yourself an outcast from civilized society, that you'll be unable to return to your former life? I have no desire to return to my former life, Agnes said firmly. I've found where I belong, Marshal, with people who value courage and honor and compassion over social standing and prejudice. The Marshal was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he nodded slowly. Then it appears Mr. Whitmore's claims of kidnapping are unfounded. Miss Hartwell is clearly acting of her own volition. This is outrageous, Richard exploded. She's throwing her life away for a savage. Someone needs to protect her from her own poor judgment. Miss Hartwell is an adult, the Marshal said tiredly. She's made her choice, and it's not our place to override it. As for you, Mr. Whitmore, I suggest you return to Boston. You've wasted enough of the federal government's time and resources with your false accusations. Richard looked between them with growing desperation. You're just going to let her go back to that Apache camp? Let her live like an animal? I'm going to respect her right to make her own choices, the Marshal replied. Something you might want to learn how to do. Now get out of my office, both of you. And Mr. Whitmore, if you make any more trouble, I'll have you arrested for filing false reports. Agnes felt weak with relief as she left the Marshal's office. Richard followed her into the street, his face contorted with rage and humiliation. This isn't over, Agnes, he hissed. You think you can humiliate me like this and just walk away? I'll ruin you. I'll tell everyone back east what you really are, a whore who prefers savages to decent men. Tell whoever you want, Agnes said wearily. I don't care what Boston society thinks of me anymore. I never did, really. I only cared what you thought, and that was my mistake. She turned to walk away, but Richard grabbed her arm roughly. You belong to me. You promised yourself to me. Let her go. Tsoe's voice was quiet but deadly as he materialized from the alley beside them, a rifle held casually in his hands. Now, Richard released Agnes as if burned, stumbling backward. I'll have you arrested for threatening me. I haven't threatened you yet. Tsoe moved to Agnes's side, his eyes never leaving Richard's face. But if you ever touch Agnes again, if you ever come near our home, if you ever so much as speak her name, I will find you. And I will make you regret being born. That is not a threat, that is a promise. The cold certainty in his voice made even Agnes shiver. Richard opened his mouth, then closed it again, apparently deciding that discretion was the better part of valor. He turned and practically ran back toward the Marshal's office. I thought we agreed you'd stay out of sight, Agnes said, but she was smiling. I saw him grab you. Tsoe's arm came around her waist. All agreements became void at that moment. They left Tucson together, riding back toward the mountains and home. As the town disappeared behind them, Agnes felt the last threads connecting her to her old life finally snap. There would be no going back now. Richard would spread his poison, would tell everyone who would listen that she had fallen from grace. But Agnes didn't care. She had something far more valuable than society's approval. She had love, real and raw and transformative. She had purpose. She had a family who accepted her, not for who she pretended to be, but for who she truly was. She had Tsoe. No regrets, he asked as they rode. Agnes leaned back against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong. Not a single one. 5 years had passed since the day Agnes chose love over propriety, and every one of those years had been richer and fuller than all her previous life combined. The world had not stopped turning, because one white woman decided to live among Apache people. The soldiers had not come to destroy their small settlement. And slowly, grudgingly, even some of the white settlers in the area had learned to treat them with grudging respect, if not acceptance. Agnes stood outside the wickiup she shared with Tsoe, watching the sun rise over the mountains and painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. In her arms, their daughter, 3-year-old Nadie, whose name meant Wise One, drowsed peacefully, her dark hair curling against Agnes's chest. At her feet, their son, 18-month-old Thomas, named for no one in particular but simply because Agnes had liked the sound of it, played in the dirt with a collection of interesting rocks. The school she had started in that first month had grown beyond her wildest expectations. Nearly 40 students now attended her classes, ranging from children learning their letters to elders determined to master English. Several of her students had gone on to become advocates for their people, using their language skills to negotiate more fairly with government officials and traders. Tsoe had become a leader in their community, respected for his wisdom and his willingness to embrace change where it made sense, while fiercely protecting traditional ways. Together, they had found a path that honored both of their worlds, creating something new and beautiful in the process. "You're up early." Tsoe's arms came around her from behind, careful not to disturb their sleeping daughter. "Couldn't sleep?" "Just thinking." Agnes leaned into his warmth. "About how different my life could have been if I'd married Richard, if I'd stayed in Boston, if you hadn't found me that day when I was 8 years old. Do you wonder what that life would have been like?" "Sometimes, but only for a moment." Agnes turned in his arms to look up at him. "Because then I remember this. You, our children, our home, our purpose. And I know I made the right choice." Tsoe kissed her softly, then grinned. "Even when Thomas decides to eat dirt, or when Nadi insists on staying up until midnight listening to Nantai's stories." "Especially then," Agnes laughed. "Besides, you're the one who encourages her. I've heard you sneaking her extra time with your uncle." "She needs to know her heritage," Tsoe protested, though his eyes danced with amusement. "Both of her heritages." That was true enough. Nadi and Thomas were living bridges between two worlds, speaking both English and Apache fluently, comfortable in buckskin or cotton dresses, equally at home roasting meat over an open fire or eating at a table with utensils. The sound of hoofbeats made them both turn. A rider was approaching, not unusual as their settlement had become something of a way station for travelers who preferred to trade fairly rather than cheat. But as the rider drew closer, Agnes felt her heart skip. It was Mrs. Dawson. The older woman dismounted slowly, looking around the camp with obvious discomfort, but also curiosity. When she spotted Agnes, her expression shifted to something complicated: regret, relief, shame. "Mrs. Dawson." Agnes handed Nadi to Tsoe and stepped forward. "This is unexpected." "I imagine so." Mrs. Dawson twisted her hands together nervously. "I've been trying to work up the courage to come here for 5 years, Agnes, to apologize, to tell you that what I did, was wrong." Agnes blinked in surprise. Thank you. That means more than you might think." "Silver Creek has changed since you left." Mrs. Dawson's eyes were sad. "Or perhaps I should say I've changed. I've had 5 teachers since you, and none of them had a tenth of your dedication or skill. The children still talk about you, still remember the teacher who stood up for what was right even when everyone else said she was wrong." "I only did what anyone should do," Agnes said quietly. "I treated people with basic human decency." "You did far more than that." Mrs. Dawson looked at Tsoe, then at the children, then back at Agnes. "You chose love over fear. You chose truth over comfort. And you've built something beautiful here. I can see it in your face, in the way your husband looks at you, in your children's eyes." She reached into her bag and pulled out a letter. "I brought you this. It's from little Emma Crawford. Well, not so little anymore. She's 14 now, and she's become quite the advocate for fair treatment of Apache people. She wanted me to tell you that you inspired her to be brave, to stand up for what's right. She's applying to Teachers College, hopes to follow in your footsteps." Tears sprang to Agnes's eyes as she took the letter. "Emma, I've thought about her so often, wondered how she was doing." "She's doing well. Thanks in large part to you." Mrs. Dawson managed a smile. "I won't keep you. I know I'm not exactly welcome here, but I wanted you to know that your example mattered, Agnes. It changed people. Changed me." After Mrs. Dawson left, Agnes stood holding Emma's letter and trying not to cry. Tsoe came to her side, their children in his arms. "Good news?" he asked gently. "The best news." Agnes wiped her eyes. "Evidence that love and courage can change the world, even if only one heart at a time." That evening, as the sun set and the camp settled into peaceful evening routines, Agnes sat by the fire with her family. Nadi was finally asleep, curled up on Tsoe's lap, while Thomas had claimed Agnes's knee as his throne. In the distance, she could hear the students from her afternoon class singing a song they'd learned, a mixture of English and Apache lyrics that represented everything they were trying to build. "Tell me again," Nadi murmured drowsily, "how you and Daddy met." Agnes exchanged glances with Tsoe and smiled. This was Nadi's favorite story, one she never tired of hearing. "Once upon a time," Agnes began, her voice soft and warm, "your father was a young warrior who found a lost little girl in the desert. He saved her life, even though he had no reason to trust her people, even though it put him in danger. He carried her to safety and then disappeared into the night. The little girl never forgot him. For 12 years, she carried his memory in her heart. And when she grew up and became a woman, she found him again. And this time she was able to save him too. Not from physical danger, but from loneliness, from a life without love. And they lived happily ever after, Nadi finished contentedly. Yes, sweetheart, they lived happily ever after. But it wasn't the end, Agnes thought as she looked around at her family, her community, her life. It was a beginning of understanding, of unity, of a future where children like Nadi and Thomas could live without having to choose between their dual heritages, where love could cross boundaries that prejudice had drawn. The path hadn't been easy. There had been hardship, struggle, moments of doubt and fear, but every trial had only strengthened the bond between Agnes and Tsoe, only deepened their commitment to each other and to the life they were building. As the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, Agnes leaned her head against Tsoe's shoulder and felt profound gratitude wash over her. She'd been given 2 chances at life, once when a young warrior saved a frightened child, and again when a grown woman had been brave enough to choose love over fear, and she had made the most of both chances. "Thank you," she whispered to Tsoe. "For what?" "For saving me, for loving me, for giving me a life worth living." Tsoe's arm tightened around her. "I should be thanking you. You gave me back my heart. You gave me hope. You gave me everything." They sat in comfortable silence as the fire burned low, and their children slept peacefully in their arms. In the distance, coyotes sang their evening song, and the wind whispered through the pine trees. The desert night was cool and clear, full of stars and promise. And Agnes knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, in Tsoe's arms, surrounded by their children, home at last in a love that had survived 12 years of separation and would endure for all the years to come. The child he saved had become the woman he couldn't forget, and the warrior who had shown mercy to a stranger had found his soulmate in the most unexpected of places. Some love stories are written in the stars. Others are written in courage, in choice, in the willingness to risk everything for the chance at something real. Theirs was both, and it was beautiful. The end. For those of you over 60 reading this story, may you remember that it's never too late to choose love over fear, passion over propriety, truth over comfort. May you find the courage to follow your heart, even when the world tells you you're too old, too set in your ways, too responsible to take such risks. Agnes and Tsoe remind us that true love recognizes no boundaries, not of age, race, or social standing, that the most meaningful life is one lived authentically, surrounded by those who see and value your true self. May you have the courage to embrace your own great love, whatever form it takes. May you never be too afraid or too proper to reach for happiness. For the woman who survived the desert night, may you always remember that the darkest moments can lead to the most brilliant dawns. For the warrior who defied his world to save a child, may you always know that one act of compassion can echo through generations. And for all those who dare to love across divides, who choose hearts over rules, who build bridges instead of walls, may you find the courage to write your own story, regardless of what the world says is possible. Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply to remember, do you remember me? And answer, yes, I remember. I choose you, always. In the end, love is always worth the risk. Always. With all our gratitude, the Wild West Whispers team. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. We hope Agnes and Tsoe's story stirred your heart and reminded you that love knows no boundaries, not of time, race, or reputation. If you felt something real while listening, please leave us a comment, like the video, and subscribe to our channel. From the bottom of our hearts, we thank you for being here. Your encouragement is what keeps us going, creating more stories full of love, redemption, and emotional twists. And don't go yet. At the end of this video, you'll see a recommendation for another story from our channel. Click and be surprised. You may just discover your next favorite love story. Wild West Whispers team.